what we will do is look at maybe a theological framework based primarily, I am more familiar with the Christian faith, and so I can speak to within Judaism the Tanakh, or our Old Testament, and then the Christian scriptures, or our New Testament. So that'll be the focus of the framework that we explore this morning. But I'd like to start by touching on just a few passages, just some brief snippets from other world religions. I don't know if you've noticed, but religious diversity in North America is on the rise, right? In my area, I live just northwest of Chicago, and we have 2 new mosques in my neighborhood. We do. And we have some phenomenal Hindu temples, very large, beautiful structures that have come up now within just probably 5 or 10 miles of where I live. We are not alone in our faith commitments, and we have partners, I believe, among all of these world religions who really do value this planet, who value this creation, and with whom we could maybe draw alongside and find companionship and support, pool our resources, pool our energy, and work together toward our common goal of creation care. So let me begin by just sharing a few words from several sacred writings. This is from the tradition of Hinduism. From one particular writing, the Ayurveda begins this way. The loving sage beholds that being, hidden in mystery, wherein the universe comes to have one home. Therein unites, and therefrom emanates the whole. The omnipresent one pervades souls and matter, like warp and woof in created beings. I think within this passage we find a glimpse of this idea of a divine being that sort of underlies all of reality and that wants to preserve unity throughout the whole creation, a coming together perhaps of between Brahman and the creation, suggests an equality of life, an equality of life for both human and non-human creation. From the tradition of Taoism, a passage from the Tao Te Ching. For the gentle way of the universe appears to be empty, yet its usefulness is inexhaustible. Fathomless, it could be the origin of all things. It has no sharpness, yet it rounds off all sharp edges. It has no form, yet it unties all tangles. It has no glare, yet it merges all lights. It harmonizes all things and unites them as one integral whole. It seems so obscure, yet it is the ultimate clarity. Whose offspring it is can never be known. It is that which existed before any divinity. Within Taoism, they recognize there's a harmony between all of the creation, all parts of the creation. Human and non-human are a part of a single unity. And it's important to recognize the value of human and non-human. From the tradition of Buddhism, this from the writing Anguttara Nikaya, this is sort of a parable, a story. And the Gautama, the Buddha, often used parables and stories in his religious teachings, much as Jesus did. Tell me if this doesn't resonate with some of our feelings and values as well. Long ago, Brahmin Kamika, Raja Horanya, had a steadfast king banyan tree, and the shade of its widespread branches was cool and lovely. Its shelter broadened to 12 leagues. That is one big tree. Huge trees. None guarded its fruit, and none hurt another for its fruit. Now then came a man who ate his fill of fruit, broke a branch, and went his way. Thought the spirit dwelling in that tree, how amazing! how astonishing it is that a man should be so evil as to break a branch off the tree after eating his fill. Suppose the tree were to bear no more fruit, and the tree bore no more fruit. Wow, that is quite a parable. Again, this idea of there being a consciousness within the entire created order of relationships between both human and non-human. We find glimpses of that within our sacred scriptures, within Judaism and Christianity as well. Two short passages from the Holy Quran. Allah has created every animal of water. Of them is that which moves upon its belly, and that which walks on two legs, and that which walks upon four. Allah creates what He will. Lo, Allah is able to do all things. A real affirmation there of the nature of the Creator and of the value of this creation. And then from Surah 6. He it is who sends down water from the sky, and therewith we bring forth buds of every kind. Look upon the fruit thereof, when they bear fruit, and upon its ripening. Lo, herein verily are signs for a people who believe. There's a recognition within Islam of the source of the food that we eat and of our responsibility to the creator of it. We could partner with our sisters and brothers in Islam on our issue. Finally, from a Native American prayer. This is from the Cree tribe, which actually is quite a large tribe throughout America and Canada. It begins this way. Sacred Father of all creation, thank you for the beauty and wonder of life. Thank you for the beauty and the wonder of this day. I sit before you as your humble servant. Guide me in all I proceed with. Sacred Mother of all creation, with utmost love and respect, I express gratitude for the gifts you provide to humanity. Thank you for nourishment that comes from your being. Thank you for the beauty of your being, the synchronicity of all action, creation, cycles, and evolution. Again, a significant affirmation within this prayer of this interdependency between Creator, humanity, and the non-human creation. We have many, many partners among, I think, our religious traditions, many sisters and brothers who we could join our hearts and minds and efforts with in pursuing creation care. And I hope that through this chapter of the Interfaith Power and Light group and others across the country that we are more intentional about doing that, about really reaching across religious lines. I think it will help reduce anxiety between our communities and really help our communities build and support our creation care efforts in a much broader and more significant way. Now, the heart of my presentation this morning is really providing insights from Judaism and Christianity. This is my primary area of study, and so I would like to share, I'll start with some insights from the Tanakh, or our Old Testament, and then move to some particular insights that would be associated with Christianity, and then through writings of the New Testament, especially some of the writings of Paul. He seems to have an awful lot of space there, right? In our New Testament, he got a lot of mileage. And so we're going to have to listen to some of the things that he says. Okay. First, from the book of Genesis in the Tanakh, or our Old Testament, primary affirmation of both the human and the non-human creation. In Genesis 1, just a tiny little bit, Genesis 1:31, God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good. Very good. Everything. Not just us. Everything. God takes delight especially those who don't seem as interested in the welfare of the non-human creation. In the second chapter of Genesis, we find a charge. This is a charge of responsibility that's given to humanity to both serve and protect the creation. Here is the way that verse 15 in chapter 2 reads. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. To till it and keep it. Now, biblical scholar Kristen Swenson has looked at those two words, the Hebrew words for till and keep, and done an analysis of the Old Testament, in which she found is that most of the time when those two words are found in different parts of the Old Testament, they mean serve and protect. Serve and protect. Isn't that interesting? I think we have been perhaps misunderstanding some of the intentions behind this charge for responsibility, especially if you think of tilling and keeping as, well, yeah, you know, we'll kind of monitor it and consume it and do what we like with it because, hey, well, that's what God told us to do. God gave it all to us. Woohoo! Thanks, God. This is good. No, that's not the end. It's not that we can't use the creation, and we should use the creation, because in fact we can't survive without the non-human creation. That's the truth. But to serve and protect is perhaps a little different way of looking at our responsibility as it relates to the Creator. Don't you like that image? Do you know where that's from? Anybody know? Anybody from Minnesota? Minnesota? Yeah? Do you recognize it? St. John's Bible. St. John's Bible. The only hand calligraphy text that I'm aware of that's been commissioned in the last 500 years. Seriously. The University of St. John's in Collegeville, Minnesota did this commission. It was all underwritten by donations. And they got Donald Jackson, who is the calligrapher of the Queen of England, to head up the scriptorium in Wales. And he hired a dozen artists to do the plates for this. It's many, many volumes. And it's designed to be used in worship. It is a working text for the people of God. And so the volumes are huge as they use them to bring out the appropriate volumes for the readings in the liturgy as they celebrate the Mass. And there are these wonderful plates. Wow, in terms of just images that I have seen of perhaps, that reference Adam and Eve, this is way closer, my friends, I think, than most of the, images we've been seeing, especially if there's any of you who come from a Scandinavian background like I do. I'm a lot of pale, blue-eyed people in the Bible, and I don't think that was true. Actually, apparently, that would be a stretch for that part of the world. There are all kinds of amazing plates in here. And I think those kinds of images help us as we begin to think about maybe a better balanced relationship between human and non-human, and the Creator behind that. All right, so we can start with Genesis. Next, if we look at the first 5 books of the Tanakh, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we find the articulation of covenant, right? The covenant that God set up between God's self and humanity. And these, rough and tough, I think you could boil it down to what God communicates are ways of living that would lead to flourishing between God and humanity and between people. That's what covenant is all about. Is about how to achieve the intentions of God for all creation in a way that leads to flourishing. And a part of that covenant is this concept of Sabbath. We find this referenced in multiple places, but in Deuteronomy 5, 13, and 14, we hear how we are to take and establish a rhythm a rhythm of work and rest. Now, that's hard, isn't it? I mean, in our culture, that in fact, don't we sort of commodify human time? You measure everything in this sort of value, economic, driven way. And we, I think, reward people for doing more work and for working without resting. And that is really contrary to covenant intentions. Covenant is meant to provide rest as well as work for both the human and the non-human creation. The rest is going to benefit us as we take that time of rest and really enjoy, observe the pelicans on their way south. That's amazing. Who would have known? And yet how many people don't even notice, don't even see them, this remarkable expression of nature in our very midst. And I think they're experiencing a little rest on the way. They understand. They get it. And we could too. The non-human creation needs rest. We need rest. And in and through this cycle of rest and work, we recognize maybe the full intentions of God for both the human and non-human creation. And we have a chance to honor God, to recognize God as the source of all life and as a source of joy in our lives. Then, within Judaism, they take, this is in another part of the covenant, from Deuteronomy 20, 19 to 20, there is a passage that talks about not participating in unnecessary destruction. The passage itself talks about when a group is at war with another group. That even in the midst of war, when they are totally distracted with their object of desire and all of that, the people of God are told not to participate in destroying trees, in destroying fields, in destruction that really has no bearing on whatever that object of their desire is. Now, that understanding has been developed within Judaism to this concept of Bal Tashit, which translated means do not destroy. Do not destroy. And it's now being applied in multiple ways in terms of conservation and in terms of ecological protection. It's being applied to overgrazing and water, clean water, protecting water, protecting minerals, protecting all kinds of dimensions of the non-human creation, using what is necessary and what is important, but not overusing, not destroying. And it's become a very important concept that's based on covenant. The book of Psalms, the songbook of both of these religious traditions, has many, many references to the human and the non-human creation. We find an interesting kind of progression as we go through the Psalter, as we look at how the non-human creation is referenced. I have a colleague at Judson, Robert Wallace, who teaches Hebrew Bible, and he sort of put me onto this. And he said, do you know that as you move through the Psalter, there is a shift in how the Psalms celebrate the human and non-human creation in light of the Creator. And in the early part of the Psalter, they start with more of a focus on humanity. It's more of an anthropocentric focus in terms of creation. But by the time we get to the end of the Psalter, there is more of an ecocentric focus that emerges. Let me read just a few lines from some of these Psalms, and you can begin to hear this progression as we go through. From Psalm 8. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals, that you care for them. Yet you have made them a little lower than God, and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. Definitely more of an elevation of the human dimension of the creation early on in the Psalter, and an accent on our responsibility in relation to the larger created order. Psalm 24, a little different accent. The earth is the Lord's, and all that's in it, the world and those who live in it. For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Here we find a reminder that God remains the owner of this entire creation. God does. Now, it seems like sometimes we are under the impression that it really is all ours, right? That it all belongs to us. And we can, well, frankly, do whatever we want with it. Anytime we want, because it's ours. Scripture tells us it's not ours. In a sense, I suppose you could think of our presence, we're sort of the tenants, right? The tenants who are given permission and privilege to occupy this creation, but that does not change ownership. The ownership is retained by God, and our charge then is to take care of what's been entrusted to us. And sometimes, I don't know, I don't think we think about it exactly that way. This would be something to remind our congregations of, I think, that God remains owner. All is God's, and one day, all will be restored as God intended. All right, then as we move to Psalms 104 and 148, we find more of this eco-centric emphasis. Just a couple verses from Psalm 104. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. When you send forth your Spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. All of this creation, human and non-human alike, matters to God, is valued by God. And we hear in the latter part of the Psalter how the stars sing to the Creator, how the mountains move in praise, and the oceans recognize the Creator. The non-human creation is given a role in giving praise to God. And that should give us pause. It should, if they have that role to play as well. I'm kind of curious now this morning, exactly what the pelicans are doing in terms of prey. But they have a role to play as well. And I do believe that the non-human creation is aware in different ways of the source of its origin as well. All right. As we move toward beyond the Psalms, we find that there is perhaps, at least I find this reference now kind of disturbing and troubling. What we hear in multiple places, in both the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Deuteronomy, other places, and in the prophets especially, is that there is an intimate link between humanity's choices in how they respond to the Creator and how they fulfill or violate covenant living and the non-human creation. Our choices have consequences for the non-human creation. I don't know that that's fair, but that's the way it is. We hear this as early as the Genesis material. In Genesis 3, we hear that the ground itself, do you remember that? Starting at verses 17 and 18 and 19, how because of the consequences of those first humans, the ground itself is cursed. It suffers because of what we did. first book of the Bible. We hear that. In Deuteronomy 11, we hear this. Take care. This is 11, starting at 16. Take care, or you will be seduced into turning away, serving other gods and worshiping them. The issue here is idolatry, right? Putting something in the place of God as a focal point for our attention. If you do this, the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens. What happens when the heavens are shut up? There is no rain, and there is terrible drought. And the non-human creation suffers along with the human creation. There will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit. Then you will perish quickly off the good land the Lord has given you. We need to think about that. In the prophets, over and over again, in Isaiah, Hosea, and Jeremiah, we hear words like this from Isaiah 24. The earth dries up and withers. The world languishes and withers. The heavens languish together with the earth. The earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. That's what happens. Remember, covenant was established in order that right relationship, flourishing would exist between Creator and humanity, within humanity, and evidently even between the human and non-human creation, right? If there are consequences. So when we violate covenant living, the earth itself suffers along with us. Elsewhere in the prophets, we find an ideal of shalom. Have some of you heard of this concept of shalom before? That's familiar? How is shalom often translated? Peace. Yeah, peace. And it does entail peace, but it's more than peace. More than peace. Shalom is very holistic. It's a vision of the entirety of life according to God's original intentions for both human and non-human creation. It refers to safety and fulfillment, peace, harmony, and completeness. Now, in Judaism today, shalom is a word that is used for both greeting when they meet and blessing when they depart. They remember, they know the ideal, and remind themselves every time they get together. Shalom. They wish that to one another when they start and when they finish their meetings together. This idea of shalom is referenced in Isaiah multiple times and in Ezekiel. Here's one passage, and perhaps from Isaiah 11, there'll be some familiarity here. The wolf shall lie down with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. What a vision. That is God's intention for all of the created order, that both human and non-human would have that sort of ideal, interdependent relationship. Let's take a look for a few minutes now at shifting gears a little bit to the Christian scriptures. As I said, Paul has an awful lot of writing in the New Testament, and so we'll rely on his vision here for much of what we have to share. Paul sees hope. Paul sees hope for both the human and the non-human creation. I think in my tradition, we often focus on the people when it comes to faith. At least it seems like the language we use often is oriented more toward the people. But I don't think we're reading the fullness of Paul when we talk, when we think in those ways. In Romans 8, we hear this, beginning at verse 18. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it. In hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. I don't know if we remember that. The very creation in which we exist is aware and longs for its restoration, God's intentions for all of the created order. Everything, from Paul's perspective, is caught up in the redemptive activity of Christ. Everything. That is, this particular passage was an inspiration. This is a painting that I did a number of years ago in thinking about the longing of the creation. That white circle that you only see a part of is sort of a reference to the wholeness of the divine, of God's presence. Only part of which we actually ever glimpse or ever see. And then the creation itself, the vegetation, the flowers, lifting up and waiting, longing for their redemption as well. In Ephesians 1 and in Colossians 1, we hear that the redemption of Christ is cosmic in its effects. Cosmic. The entire universe is a part of the reconciliation work. This is from Ephesians 1:7. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace, that he lavished on us with all the mystery of his will, according to his good pleasure, that he set forth in Christ as a plan for the fullness of time, in the fullness of time, to gather up all things in him, things in heaven and things on earth. All things will be restored and reconciled. Again, what are the implications of that? What does that mean? If all is working toward that restoration, and if in fact those who follow Christ are to be agents, active in that reconciliation of Christ, doesn't that then, according to Paul, have an obligation toward the non-human creation? For it too will be restored. It is an object of the work of Christ, the redemption of Christ. Creation care then becomes not just a good thing to do. It is a good thing to do, and that's maybe not a bad starting point for us. But I think there's something eschatological here as well. And there's an opportunity for all who affirm Christ as Lord and Savior to be agents of redemption in relation to both the human and the non-human creation. It is there in the teachings of Paul. Now, this, of course, has a bearing on the destiny of our world. And again, I find, at least in my tradition, and perhaps in some of yours, there are some who are not convinced that this creation has any destiny that is eternal, that is lasting. They think that or believe that this world has a very limited lifespan. And if it has a very limited lifespan, why should we bother? Right? Why should we even bother to do anything? Let's just use it up, burn it out, throw it away when we're done. Actually, that fits in American context pretty well, doesn't it? It's perfect for adultery. Isn't that what we do? And then we get a new one. But this becomes problematic with respect to the creation. A new one? Where? How are we going to do that? This is the only one we know of. I would argue that that thinking is based on misunderstanding and misinterpreting some passages in the New Testament. 2 Peter 3:10 is one of those passages. In this verse, let me read the verse for you, and maybe some of you will recognize this. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, and the elements will be dissolved with fire, and the earth and everything that is done on it will be disclosed. Now, all of these readings I'm doing are from the New Revised Standard Version. So, some of the language may be familiar and some may not. But what does that passage mean? Does that mean that that is the destiny of this creation? That it will simply be destroyed? That interpretation has been made and is floating around in our churches. But that interpretation doesn't seem to me to be consistent with all that we've heard in terms of affirmation of the non-human creation throughout the Old Testament, and all that Paul says about the cosmic significance of the redemption of Christ. If the redemptive activity of Christ really does have bearing on the non-human creation, then what's this destruction about? It doesn't seem consistent anyway. Because if that were the way, I suppose then that God could just destroy all of us, right? And maybe pursue a do-over. That one didn't work. That iteration of those people. Now let's do it again. But God chose not to. I mean, we don't make that interpretation in terms of humanity. So why do we come to that conclusion in terms of the non-human creation? I don't think that's what was intended. A better interpretation, a better reading of fire. And you can find this throughout the New Testament. Fire is referenced in terms of refining, in terms of purging. That there will be a time when all will be subject to the judgment of God. And the disclosure has to do with identifying that which is not consistent with God's original intentions. That will be removed. The disclosure is the revelation of that which is not consistent with God's intentions. That will be separated out, again, in and through the redemptive work of Christ. Now, I think this is a multi-layered sort of a process. And I think the people of God are being invited to participate in that transformation. Not someday, but in the here and now. I think that's what creation care in faith communities is actually all about. Is working toward this redemption, this cosmic redemption of both human and non-human creation. Ultimately, it will lead to this, as mentioned in Revelation 21, beginning at verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, where the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more." A new heaven and a new earth, in and through the transformative power of Christ, making all things new. This is renewal, not destruction and recreation. Some have said, oh, it's making all new things. No, it's making all things new. That's what creation care is about. The renewal of all things. Not in a Christ's redemptive work renews the entire creation. For Christians, I think we can come to this conclusion. We now have been given this opportunity because of these understandings, this revelation in these scriptures, our understandings of Paul's insight. Creation care is a chance for us to participate in the transformative power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's, I think, for Christian creation care efforts. It's the resurrection. Again, is that a new word for you all? Or is that something that you've heard before? I sometimes wonder. I sort of run through these things, and you all are very polite. And that's wonderful. What do you think? Does that actually make sense? Does this approach to Scripture make sense? Yeah? Is that consistent with our understanding of the power of the resurrection? Right? Was Jesus' body annihilated? It wasn't. It was transformed. It was made new. It was redeemed. That's what it was. And he is the prototype. His resurrection is the prototype for the resurrection of all things. But it's interesting that in Paul's understanding, that includes human and non-human. All things. I think we have a mandate. I think we have a mandate for pursuing creation care. And I think there's a lot of good work that we could do together. Okay, so here's the challenge. As of, I think, a year ago, last fall, population of our planet went past 7 billion. That's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. It's the most we've had, I believe, up until this point. But you know what? It is a big planet. And there are actually lots of resources. Now, do you remember in the mid-20th century how there were all these really, really dire predictions about this exponential growth? Remember that? About the population, how it would be doubling and trebling and quadrupling, and oh my goodness, we're going to have so many more really, really fast. That didn't happen. And it didn't happen for a number of reasons. But one factor that we have come to learn that was a part of that is simply affluence. As affluence has risen in the world, as people have been a little better off economically, guess what happened to the number of children they had? It went down, not up, right? They maybe had a little more free time and wanted to share a little bit more with their kids, but then you need fewer kids, right? If you're going to do that in ways that maybe you would want to. So that sort of through-the-roof exponential growth is going to happen, because even now in India and other places, the population rise. It's still going up quite a bit, but it's sort of leveling a bit. But they do say that by 2050, we will reach the point of 9 billion. Okay? Just at our present rate of growth, 9 billion. This is a reason to become better neighbors, I'm thinking. I think we're going to have to get a little better at sharing the resources of this world. And again, that's a hard word, I think, for those in this sort of American context, where we have been, let's face it, very privileged, and haven't had a lot of qualms about traveling to every corner of the earth and taking whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, however we wanted. And that, about the, people from whom we are removing things and sharing, I think we need to be more fair. And to be honest, as economic fluency is rising, especially across South Asia, there's more demand there as well. And, who are we to say that they shouldn't have their fair share of the natural resources of this world? And so I think people of faith have an opportunity here to be able to model maybe some initiatives that are focused on equity and on sharing our natural resources. And we have, again, an opportunity to promote the flourishing of both the human and non-human creation. But we're going to
have to be really, really intentional about developing this theological understanding in our communities. I'm not sure that we're quite as systematic as we could be. And I think that if we were to take some of these understandings and weave them naturally into some of our education classes, some of our catechesis classes, into our worship services, into our worship celebrations, with more intention, with more regularity, I think it will help raise the consciousness, both of the fullness of the intention of Scripture, and then maybe position our people in asking the question, oh, now what are we supposed to do? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Because we have a couple of ideas, right? We have some things that we could share. All right. I have touched on these things very quickly in this presentation, but I go into them in a little more detail with many more resources in the book that was mentioned. So they're very gracious and generous in having that here. So if you'd like to explore some of these theological understandings and biblical references a little bit more, it would be a good idea just to read through that first chapter. And I'm hoping that that could be a template too for your sharing. It might even be interesting just to take that material and have a group read it together. And over a series of weeks, kind of talk through some of these passages. Talk through, what have been traditional understandings, or how have people heard these passages talked about in the past? What's been the focus? And what might be a more holistic way of thinking about what God's intentions are and the fullness of meaning. I do have also, in addition to the book, some web resources. This will be especially helpful for the next presentation, where I'm going to show you very pragmatic sort of examples of how we can take creation care and apply it to the building process. I do have on Facebook a number of images, probably maybe 10 or 12, for the faith congregations that are featured in the book. I do have 10 different communities from across the United States, and then one in Toronto, that are featured in this book. And I think it's really helpful to be able to see and just sort of learn from one another. Again, I would encourage all of you, even as you do this sort of theological exploration, begin to invite others within your community to this conversation and see what kind of insights come out of their traditions as well, and see what kind of consensus could be built in terms of thinking about a creator and humanity and the non-human creation. I think that there is more common ground than we know, and I think we would do well to build on that and cultivate. All right, please, yeah, that's.
It's difficult to see those websites.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're right. Okay, in terms of the resolution. All right. Yeah, I can make those available. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What this is to the publisher. This is at allband.org, the top one, and this is at allband.org, the second one as well. Yeah. If you go to that website and then you put in the title of the book, that's really all it is.